Good Wednesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for July the 26th. Today, we are reading together the famous story of David and Goliath that is found in 1 Samuel chapter 17. David was introduced into the story of Israel yesterday, as we read in chapter 16. He was anointed by Samuel to be the next king of Israel. And then we're going to see him continuing to interact with Saul and the leadership within Israel. He's obviously going to take a very prominent step into the main viewing of Israel today as he steps up and is the one who's willing to challenge Goliath. He steps up onto the main stage and becomes a pivotal figure here within the history of Israel. So let me go and get the text up on the screen for us. We'll read along together here in 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 1, the Philistines gathered their forces for war at Soko in Judah and camped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes Damim. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley of Elah. Then they lined up in battle formation to face the Philistines. The Philistines were standing on one hill, and the Israelites were standing on another hill with a ravine between them. Then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet 9 inches tall and wore a bronze helmet and bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. There was bronze armor on his shins, and a bronze javelin was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. He stood and shouted to the Israelite battle formations. "Why do you come out and line up in battle formation?" he asked them. "Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose one of your men and have him come down against me. If he wins in a fight against me and kills me, we will be your servants. But if I win against him and kill him, then you will be our servants and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other." When Saul and all Israel heard these words from the Philistine, they lost their courage and were terrified. Now Saul was the son of the Ephrathite from Bethlehem of Judah named Jesse. Jesse had 8 sons, and during Saul's reign was already an old man. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war, and their names were Eliab, the firstborn, Abinadab, the next, and Shammah, the third. And David was the youngest. The 3 oldest had followed Saul, but David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. Every morning and evening for 40 days, the Philistine came forward and took his stand. One day Jesse had told his son David, "Take this half bushel of roasted grain, along with these 10 loaves of bread for their brothers, and hurry to their camp. Also take 10 portions of cheese to the field commander. Check on the well-being of your brothers and bring a confirmation from them." They were with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had charged him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry. Israel and the Philistines lined up in battle formation facing each other. David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. While he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words, which we read earlier. David heard these. When all the Israelites men saw Goliath, they retreated from him terrified. Previously, an Israelite man had declared, "Do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will make the man who kills him very rich and will give him his daughter. The king will also make the family of that man's father exempt from paying taxes in Israel." David spoke to the men who were standing with him. "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel?" Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Troops told him about the offer, concluding, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. David's oldest brother Eliab listened as he spoke to the men, and he became angry. Why did you come down here? He asked. Who did you leave those few sheep with in the wilderness? I know your arrogance and your evil heart. You came down to see the battle. What have I done now? Protested David. It was just a question. Then he turned from those beside him and to others in front of him and asked about the offer. The people gave him the same answer as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul. So he had David brought to him. David said to Saul, don't let anyone be discouraged by him. Your servant will go and fight the Philistine. But Saul replied, you can't go fight this Philistine. You're just a youth, and he's been a warrior since he was a youth. David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. Then David said, Yahweh, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and may Yahweh be with you. Then Saul had his own military clothes put on David. He put a bronze helmet on David's head and had him put on armor. David strapped his sword on over the military clothes, and he tried to walk, but he was not used to them. I can't walk in these, David said to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off. Instead, he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his pouch, or in the pouch, in his shepherd's bag. Then, with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. The Philistine came closer and closer to David, with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he despised him because he was a youth, healthy and handsome. He said to David, am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? Then he cursed David by his gods. Come here, the Philistine called to David, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a spear or with a sword, spear, and javelin. But I come against you in the name of Yahweh of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. You have defied him. Today, Yahweh will hand you over to me. Today, I will strike you down, remove your head, and give the corpses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. Then all the world will know that Israel has a God, and this whole assembly will know that it is not by sword or by spear that Yahweh saves, for the battle is Yahweh's. He will hand you over to us. When the Philistines started forward to attack him, David ran quickly to the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and hit the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. David defeated the Philistine with a sling and a stone. David overpowered the Philistine and killed him without having a sword. David ran over to him. He grabbed the Philistine's sword, pulled it from its sheath, and used it to kill him. Then he cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and Judah rallied, shouting their battle cry, and chased the Philistines to the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. Philistine bodies were strewn all around the Sha'araim road to Goth and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from the pursuit of the Philistines, they plundered their camps. David took Goliath's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put Goliath's weapons in his own tent. When Saul had seen David going out to confront the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of the army, whose son is this youth, Abner? Well, your majesty, as long as you live, I don't know, Abner replied. The king said, find out whose son this young man is. When David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? Well, the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. David answered. And that is 1 Samuel chapter 17. All right, so we get really into the real action of David's life beginning here, where he becomes engaged in this battle with Goliath, ends up having the victory, and it obviously gets thrown into the spotlight. That's what I was trying to think of earlier. The spotlight of Israel. Remember, Saul was put in place to deliver the people from their enemies. The Philistines are mentioned specifically a number of times. Here is one of those instances where they are gathered to fight against the Philistines, and the Philistines have their champion, this very, very tall man. The CSB has him listed at 9 feet 9 inches. The Septuagint version, he was 4 cubits and a span. So whatever that works out to, CSB renders it as 9 feet 9 inches. That's pretty tall. That's almost his head touching the rim of a basketball goal. He was a tank of a man, a mountain of a man. Very, very, he was very formidable and obviously very intimidating. So much so that whenever he would go and shout at the Israelites, basically taunt Israel, taunt them, say about how they're nothing, how their gods are nothing, and his gods are the greatest. And you know what? Let's just go ahead and settle this, guys. You send out your warrior, and let them face me. Whoever wins the day, and we'll go from there. When Saul and all Israel hears this, they're terrified. They have no courage. Which, again, that seems to be kind of the way that Saul operated. Very, very doubtful. It's very fearful, very cowardly quite often. And that bleeds over to the people. You are what your leadership is normally. If your leader's a coward, then you're probably going to be pretty cowardly as well. So that's where we're standing. We're standing at the Philistines, and the Israelites are at war. The Israelites don't really want to fight because Goliath is representing his people, and they're kind of at a standstill, not knowing exactly what to do. So David is now introduced again in verse number 12. His 3 oldest brothers, who are Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, they are at war, and Jesse wants to send some supplies to them while they're at war. So Jesse sends them to his brothers to check on them and to bring back confirmation about how they're doing to their dad. So David does that. He does what his dad said. He loads up, gets going, comes to the perimeter of the camp, hears the battle cry. He leaves the supplies. He runs to the front lines. He wants to see what's going on. He finds his brothers, speaks to them, and then he actually hears Goliath shouting and doing his little bit. And David hears this, and he sees how terrified everyone is. He sees them all retreating, and David stands up, and he says, "Who's gonna take care of this? Basically, what's going to be done for the man who takes care of this uncircumcised swine? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" That's where David's focus is. David's focus isn't so much so just on physically the war in front of him, but the reality that Goliath is blaspheming Yahweh. And David takes that very seriously. David is not very happy with the fact that this uncircumcised Philistine is speaking ill against his God. Because it's not just about the Philistines versus the Israelites as far as battle goes. This is really, there's a supernatural element to this. This is the gods of the Philistines against the God of Israel. And Goliath believes that his gods are greater than the Israelite God. And David is not very happy about this at all. They relay to David what is mentioned in verse 25 about the one who kills him will be very rich. His family will have tax exempt status. And as he's having this discussion, David's oldest brother, Eliab, well, as David's sitting here basically rebuking them for somebody not having the courage to stand up and fight this guy, Eliab is probably embarrassed at his own cowardice and says, "Well, why did you come down here, David? You know, what'd you do with those few sheep that you're dealing with? I know your arrogance. I know your evil heart. You just came down to see the battle." Well, who's right? Who's right about the condition of David's heart? Is it Eliab or God? Eliab says his heart is arrogant and evil, but Yahweh says his heart is good. Why does Eliab say this again? I think he's embarrassed by his own cowardice. And the reality that David's disappointed that no one's willing to stand up and fight against this uncircumcised Philistine. David doesn't back down whatsoever. He doesn't back down from Eliab. He doesn't back down from Goliath. Whenever he gets to Saul, he says, "Don't back down. Don't be discouraged. I'll go fight him. Send me out there." And Saul's like, "Well, no, you can't go fight him. You're just a kid. And this guy's been a warrior since he was a kid." David relays to him his experience fighting against the predators that would attack his flocks, bears, lions. I'd go after it. If they took one of my lambs, I'd go after it. I'd kill it. God is with me. God was with me then, and he was full of confidence that God would be with him now. Because again, in David's mind, that there's a spiritual element here. There's something supernatural going on. It's not just about army and army. It's not just about flesh and flesh. It's about the spiritual beings that the Philistines believed were behind them, and that they were better than the God of Israel. So he had full confidence. Verse 37, Yahweh, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul says, fine. May Yahweh be with you. David here is willing to stand up and do what Saul should have been doing. Saul, as the king, should have been the leader. He should have taken the initiative, but he didn't. But David here is willing to do such. Why? What's the difference? What's the difference between Saul and David? Well, the difference between Saul and David is the reality that David had confidence in Yahweh, whereas David did not, or David had confidence in Yahweh, whereas Saul did not. Saul's confidence was not in his God. That's why he wouldn't stand up. But David's most certainly was. Again, they go through the funny little bit about how they try to put the armor on David. Doesn't work. He's small. It's not his thing. And or smaller, I guess. He's just not used to wearing it. So he gets his normal stuff, his everyday carry, you might say. He's got his staff, he's got his pouch, he's got his sling, he's got some stones, and he goes and he faces Goliath. Goliath's insulted. He's insulted that this little dude would come up and face him. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And he cursed David by his gods. Again, that supernatural element is here. They taunt each other a little bit. But David says, you know what? You're coming at me with all these swords, all these weapons, but I'm coming at you with the power of my God behind me. The confidence of David is incredible. Today, Yahweh will hand you over to me. Today, I'll strike you down, remove your head, and give the corpses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. And then all the world will know that Israel has a God. And this whole assembly will know that it is not by the sword or by spear that Yahweh saves, for the battle is Yahweh's. He will hand you over to me. Where's David's confidence? Again, 100% fully in his God. He believes without a shadow of a doubt that Yahweh will give him this great victory. Well, now the battle begins. The Philistine steps forward. Goliath goes at him. David grabs one of the stones, slings it, smacks him straight in the forehead, and knocks him down, incapacitates him severely. He goes up, grabs Goliath's own sword. I mean, what is worse than being killed with your own weapon? And yet that's exactly what happens here to Goliath. David takes the sword, cuts off his head, has the victory. And now, verse 52, the roles change. The Philistines see their champion dead. The Israelites see this young boy as their champion, having been victorious. Now the Philistines retreat and the Israelites pursue. David leads the way. Really, God leads the way. He was just waiting for someone to step up and put their trust in him so that he could do this very thing. They pursue the Philistines. Excuse me. There's a great plunder. They plunder the people and the camps and everything. Goliath takes the head to Jerusalem, or excuse me, David takes Goliath's head to Jerusalem, but he keeps his weapons for himself. And verses 55 through 58, they're weird to me. I don't quite understand what's going on here. I don't know the best way to understand this, because Saul sees David going out. He confronts the Philistine, and he asks the commander of his army, who is this? But back in 16, we saw David introduced to Saul. At least we do in verses 14 through 23. So the question is there a chronology issue here? Again, we need to recognize that they did not write in perfect chronology. They could insert things various places. For example, we see that in this very chapter, verses 25, includes in the course of reading the rewards but then it's not, the text itself doesn't include the rewards that they're told to David until after that. We would probably do that differently, that he's told the rewards because someone had previously said such and such. That's just not how they write. So I don't quite know how to understand Saul's lack of knowing who David is here. If you have any thoughts about that, please feel free to leave that below. Maybe have something I don't know. But at the end of the day, it seems that verse 58, he's figured out, okay, whose family is going to be tax exempt? who gets the reward for this great victory that was done by this young man? So within this chapter, we see David already elevating himself above Saul. Saul is scared, David's courageous. Saul is inactive, David's active. Very much like Jonathan in the previous chapters that we've seen, where Jonathan was willing to go out and fight where his father was not. Saul doesn't seem to have any confidence in God, at least that's not expressed, but David does. And who ends up being in the spotlight? David. David. And what's going to end up being sung by so many in this next chapter, in chapter 18 verse 7, Saul has killed his thousands, but David's his tens of thousands. We're beginning to see that shift, because remember, Yahweh's presence has left Saul. It has found itself on David. Saul's days are numbered. David is the one who's going to take over the throne. We're beginning to see that, and really this is the big shift here in chapter 17, where that begins to happen. Well, let's just take to heart, though, the reality of this chapter. David didn't accomplish any of this. It's not about David. It's about God. God achieved the victory here through David. Yes, David might have been the one doing it, but the one who supplied him to it. Goliath's not going to be killed by a stone to the forehead unless God is behind him and doing that. And that's exactly what we see here. So take that to mind as we're going through as we're thinking about this chapter. And again, keep that in mind as we're going throughout this entire story. Focus on what God is doing, not necessarily the characters, but focus on God. Look at what he's accomplishing, and look at what it takes for someone to be able to participate with God in accomplishing those great things. David was able to participate with God because he trusted God, because he had confidence in God, because he was willing to put himself out there for God. My friends, that's a great lesson for us as well. If we want to participate with God in the great things that he's trying to do in this world and in our lives, then we must trust him. We must have courage. We must be willing to act in his name. And in doing so, we too can achieve great things and give him great glory. Again, if you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comments section below. And we'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading together from 1 Samuel chapter 18, where things begin to turn, where things are looking great right now for David and Saul. That's not going to last very long, though. We'll be looking forward to reading about that tomorrow. Hope to see you then. Hope to see everybody tonight for our Bible studies beginning at 7 p.m. Take care and God bless.